Welcome to the Music Makers Cookbook, the podcast that helps independent artists cook up recipes for success in the music industry. I'm Sean.
I'm Brandon.
Welcome to today's episode 76.
Wow.
Yep, we got a pretty good episode like we always do.
We seem to think so.
We seem to think so.
Yeah.
This is like a very basic one, a very quick one. It's going to be about latency, how to optimally set up for it, what it is, and how to accommodate for all of that.
So annoying, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Terrible.
But before we dive into that, we have a quick appetizer. Appetizer professing the main dish. And just a really quick question that happens to be something that I have to answer a decent amount when I work with remote artists who are doing recording at home or whatnot. And that is, Sibilance, how to deal with it when recording. Because that's the easiest time and the best place to deal with it is in the recording. So it's not even in the recording.
Yep.
They have de-essers and things like that. But it's just better to tackle it up front.
Yep.
So before even that, like when we say sibilance, what we're referring to is the S's and the T's and, those sharp
even
sounds.
the chas. Anything that is very sharp in that upper register during those S kind of sounds, T kind of sounds, cha kind of sounds. They can be very annoying, very annoying, and very hard to deal with too, depending on who you're dealing with. Yeah, very tough. And these happen in different registers too. You can have top S's, or you could have more S, more sharp S's in like the 4K, 5K range, right? And so it really depends on who your artist is. I would say first and foremost, just fix your teeth. No, I'm just kidding. Totally joking. I don't even know if that has something to do with it.
I don't think it is a teeth thing. I think it's more of a tongue.
I've thought about it. I think it is more of a tongue thing. I always thought it might have been related to the teeth somehow. But I think
that's probably really annoying to people listening. I'm just like sitting over here going like,
I would like to know the kind of like the biology behind it and know if it is the teeth, or if it is the tongue, or what exactly dictates sibilance, in the mouth.
I think it's the tongue. I think it's the placement and the embouchure of the mouth.
I would assume so too, right?
How the words are being said, the shape of the embouchure of the mouth, and what frequency it is, whether it's high or low.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's just something that oftentimes can be picked up very prevalently,
and
especially exaggeratedly in amateur recording or home recording if it's not tackled up front. And it's not necessarily the hardest thing to deal with and to account for if you know that, hey, usually there's some sibilance here. I don't want there to be sibilance here, so what can I do to fix it? Most basic one that I know of is on-axis versus off-axis.
That was going to be the first one I'd go to too. Yep. If you're getting more sibilance than you desire, flip the microphone a little bit on or off-axis and see if that helps eliminate any of the top end. Of course, there are trade-offs with this, right? You lose a little bit of top end a little bit, There's always a trade-off somewhere, right? But if you're really experiencing a lot of sibilance and you want to deal with it up front, take it off axis a little bit.
It's a great way to do it.
That's number one, Number two for me would be just choose a different microphone.
Yeah, some microphones do accent those frequencies. So if you can get one that's more of a duller one that can help with it, which is why the SM7B is such a popular broadcast mic, because it so far away from the capsule, it has that foam over it that really does help with sibilance and pop, so plosives.
Absolutely. And it's like, let's take an example, like the AT2020, the Audio-Technica AT2020. It's a very baseline microphone. It's $100, so a lot of people can afford it. It's often the first go-to when you're setting up your home studio, right? The top end is so exaggerated on that microphone that I find, of course you might think differently if you're using it, and each voice is different. Obviously that's the caveat here, but I find that the microphone exaggerates the top end, whether it's the components that they use or they do it on purpose to give you that nice, clear, crystal sound. So it sounds expensive, right? But often the trade-off there is that you exaggerate the sibilance from your vocalist, right? So maybe you swap that with like what Sean was saying. Maybe an SM7B helps roll off the sibilance a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Or you just go to a different condenser. Maybe you have Rode NT1A, and even though that's a very exaggerated, top end on that one too, and also a budget-friendly mic. Maybe that top end's better though. Maybe the shelf is at a different place, right?
The frequencies that it accentuates are better for your voice than the other one.
Yep. So that would be my second in line is change the microphone. Sometimes you just have to do it.
A third thing, which I kind of hinted at by saying the SM7B has the foam around it, is like a pop filter or some foam or something that can go in the way that can just kind of break up the air a little bit. This also helps with plosives, but it can help with some of that sharpness. And get you better positioned further from the mic so you're not right up on it, which is the fourth way to deal with it. Get some distance.
It's all. It's
Yep.
all. That can help out so much. So much.
Yeah.
A little bit of distance can also give you a little bit of depth too.
It can.
Like, you know, so that might be kind of cool. It also gives you a little bit more room. So if you're in a nice room or you're in a nice booth and you want that extra room, that can also help too.
Yeah.
So there are benefits and drawbacks to this, but you know, sometimes you'll find hidden benefits along the way when you're experimenting with how to get rid of some sibilance. And of course, like at the beginning, my teeth comment was totally a joke. I wanted to say that too, because obviously I don't have great teeth. But like, you know, sometimes that's just the way that it is. It's just sometimes how we speak.
And different
people, yep. And you might not notice it when you're having a conversation with somebody. But once you step up to a microphone, man, those things pick up everything.
Yep.
They
Little
pick up
does
everything.
Brandon know I've got the de-esser slammed on his vocal when
Do
I
you
edit
really?
the podcast. No, I don't.
Oh, you should, please. That, well, you know, now that's number 5, right? Is do it in post,
yeah,
right?
do it in post, yeah.
And oftentimes that's with the de-esser. There are all different types of de-essers out there. I'm not going to recommend one because they're de-essers. You know, you just got to try them out for yourself. There are cheap ones and there are expensive ones. But de-essing in the box is not necessarily a bad thing. You can prevent it like we just tried to tell you. But if you get to a point where you can't redo something or you didn't catch it in the session, de-essers are more than valid to do. Yeah. And you have to be very careful with de-essers. You have to be very careful because you can give people lisps real quick. Yep. And I noticed that the Pro Tools one is more heavy-handed with that than other ones. Yeah. Whenever I try the Pro Tools one, man, I can give you a lisp so quick, bro. It's not even funny. It's not even funny.
That's true.
But each de-esser has their own way of how they handle it, whether it's soft de-essing. I'm thinking of like the IK Multimedia one. You can choose soft or hard.
I never used that one.
Yeah, it's not bad. Yeah. It's not bad. I've been using it more and more. I
use the Neutron one a lot.
Neutron one's great.
That one's very clear to me.
The Waves one is the classic de-essers. That's the classic. It
just gets the job done.
Yep, you have FabFilter Pro DS, and that's really getting into fine tuning your S's, and then you can then you can even go over to dynamic EQ and go that route, or multi-band compression. But that's beyond the scope of what we're doing today. You don't feel bad if you have to use a de-esser.
Yeah, this is just an appetizer. We're not going to dig deep into it. But if you want us to, let us know. We can make a full-on deep dive YouTube video explaining what de-essers are and how to tackle them. So just leave us a comment, letting us know something you're interested in, and we'll create that video for you.
Now, I will say, the more processing you do in the box on tracks, right, and the more time you don't take, that was a weird way to say it, the less time you take up front and trying to perfect a vocal take, the more processing you do on these tracks can lead to additional latency, right?
Yep.
Which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Exactly.
So this is why we should try to avoid processing as much as possible and try to get it right in the front end. So I love today's appetizer because it directly relates to things that we have to fix later on. So we might as well get it right first. So the more processing we have, generally the more latency we'll get. Yeah. And latency is a pain in the ass, Sean.
Do you want to quickly demonstrate what latency is real quick?
Sure.
All right, ask me what latency is.
Sean, what's latency?
Well, thanks for asking that question, Brandon. If you've ever watched a news video where there's someone in the field and the reporter asks the person in the field a question and they just stare in the camera blankly for 5 seconds before answering, that's because there's latency from when the audio is initially stated to when the other person is hearing. Now, in music, latency can be in monitoring from when the source is recorded to when you hear it in the headphones. Latency can be very distracting when you are recording something like that because now you are hearing it from 2 sources, not time aligned. So a longer latency is usually worse for recording than a shorter latency. However, shorter latencies take more processing power, which is what Brandon was hinting at, where if you have too much post-processing stuff in the box, that can lead to a worse latency and a worse recording experience. And if you want to learn how to optimize your computer, your setup more to avoid things like that, we have an episode on that. I think it was episode 74.
Not too long ago. So these two kind of go hand in hand a little bit, and we actually mentioned latency on there quite a bit too. It's a very common issue to deal with, and I've dealt with it myself before. I'm sure you've dealt with it at some point where you try to troubleshoot your chain and you just can't figure out where that latency is coming from because there's always a weak link, and you're only as good as your weakest component of the chain, right? And then you have to kind of reverse engineer where that discrepancy is falling, right? And the worst part is that this can be very expensive to do. Well,
let's walk through a scenario. You're recording at home. You've got an idea in your head. You've got your interface, your setup, your microphone. you're about to record something, be it vocal, guitar, drums, whatever it may be. And when you click record, you are hearing this delay between what you were performing and what you were hearing. That is distracting you. And also, once you stop recording inside the session, it is not lined up properly because you recorded with that delay. And it's like, well, man, nothing's lining up here. I can't deal with this. How do I fix this problem? There are a couple things to look at in a order that I kind of go through myself. Maybe yours is different to kind of troubleshoot this kind of thing. But the very first thing is to look at the latency of your interface and of your computer, of your DAW. Now, sometimes it's labeled as latency, like it specifically says latency in FL Studio, and you can change it. In Pro Tools, it's buffer rate. So it is labeled differently depending on what DAW you are working on, but that is the first place to look.
That's exactly where I look to. That's the first place every time. Usually when you go into these buffer rates, buffer size, that's what we're going to be saying, because that's what we're probably most familiar with. And I feel like that translates pretty well across each DAW, but like you said, it does vary. So if we go into the buffer rate setting and we see it's at 1024 samples, right? That means we have a lot of latency going on because the computer's doing a lot of processing. We're freeing up space for the computer to work more efficiently as a standalone, if that makes sense. Now, if we decrease, so conventional knowledge would be like, oh, maximum number is going to get us the fastest, right? Actually, it's the opposite way. We're going to want to decrease our buffer size, so that way there's more instantaneous reactions. However, the computer won't do as much processing, or won't have as many resources to process on the back end of things, which means that our plugins that we like to use maybe in our tracking sessions might need to be lessened to free up extra space for the computer to do its job efficiently and record you fast enough so you don't get a latency.
If you have a bunch of samples or plugins or synths or any sort of instrument plugin on your DAW, that can quite often use a lot of computer processing power in order for it to play those sounds for you then to record on top of. So when you lower the buffer rate or lower the latency, it's better for recording, because now you're not hearing that separation between what you're saying and what you're performing and what you're hearing through your headphones and self-monitoring with. But now you're asking the computer to do a lot more work, as you were saying. And if the computer can't handle it, then you might hear some crashes. And nothing takes you out of a flow state
it's terrible.
Faster and harder than feeling it, getting into it, and then
that's the worst. And not only that, but it can also be like, let's say you're running a studio session for your friend at your own home studio or something. Having clicks and pops along the way, that can also manifest too. And man, that is so distracting and annoying too. And that can just decrease your confidence so much too. So you'll see it manifest in so many different ways. Either you're going to hear yourself quite a bit and it's going to be almost not realistic to record. B, you're going to get crashes, which Pro Tools loves to do. And or C, you're going to get a lot of clicks and pops, and it's going to sound so annoying, because you don't know if those clicks and pops are actually coming from the take itself or it's coming from the computer. Then you got to do a little bit more troubleshooting too, right? So it'll pop up every now and again, but usually that's a good place to start, though, is with that buffer size setting.
As a rough estimate, when you are recording, I personally recommend a buffer size between 128 and 256. 256 is a little bit on the high end.
It is a little bit.
Sometimes people can really hear it, but it gives enough time for your session to process these heavier plugins. But also another trick is if you have, there's no such thing as like a light reverb plugin, but there are some that are lighter than others. So if you're able to get just a simple reverb on the vocal or the source that you're tracking, that can kind of smooth it out, so that delay is less noticeable.
Let's say you're using like Valhalla Vintage Verb or something like that, right? Something very cheap. It's not a convolution reverb, so it doesn't have to actually take the profile of the IR and replace it every time and then calculate it out, right? It takes up so much less CPU power.
So if even at 256, like let's say at 128, your computer can't do it, so you have to go to 256, but then you're kind of getting thrown off a little bit by the timing. Maybe try throwing a little bit of a reverb on or something, just to kind of make it sound more naturally in the monitoring.
Great idea.
And smooth it out a little bit.
Absolutely.
That's all I want to say. But now you're getting into the juicy parts of like, cool, you've done the buffer setting, you've got it where it is, but you're still having crashes or you're still hearing the pops. What's the next thing to look at in the session?
If you're still experiencing that, just make sure you don't have any computer intensive plugins on your session, right? That's my next one. And I fall victim to this one a lot, because if I'm reopening sessions, that means I've already printed the session a previous day. And the last thing I put on a session is a limiter, so people can listen to their song. And the limiter I use induces a lot of latency. So if I'm still getting latency after I'm checking the buffer rate and the buffer size and everything, I know that it's probably a plugin. And every time I find FabFilter Pro L2 on there, it's active, and then I disable it, gone. Latency's gone. So that's my next step, right? Is to go through your session. Luckily for us Pro Tools fans, we have samples that we can see how of the delay compensation that the Pro Tools is compensating for. And we can determine like, hey, this is really high. Let's knock off something and kind of play with the plugins a little bit and see which one it is. Boom, knock this one off. It's gone. I'm like, okay, so this is the guy. Not going to use this on tracking sessions anymore, right? Or I'm just going to take it off of this session for now, and then I'll re-put it on later, right? So that's my next step of troubleshooting most of the time is goes from buffer size to looking for problematic areas within the session itself, and then eliminate those.
Yeah, and if you have plugins that are like necessary for the song, necessary for you to hear while you're tracking, you don't necessarily have to remove them.
Right.
If you can potentially just make them inactive.
Exactly.
Not bypass.
That's what I meant. Yep.
Yeah, but like make them inactive.
Yep.
Or what you can specifically do in Pro Tools, and other DAWs have this functionality too, is you can freeze the track, which
so good.
does a temporary render of it, converts to an audio file that has everything embedded in it, and then makes every other plugin and aspect of the track unactive, so that way it stops pulling processing power and it's just an audio file.
So good. Glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. If you don't have the ability to freeze a track in whatever DAW you're working on, then what you can do is you can just render it, bring it back in the session, or render it down to another track in the session, and then make inactive that track. And that will allow you to basically bypass or make inactive all the stuff that's causing that delay.
Exactly.
And just having a audio wave file that you can then perform on top of. Now, there are so many different DAWs out there. So just to cover my basis, if you are working in a DAW, it doesn't allow you to freeze, or it doesn't allow you to bounce down, render within inside of a session.
Like GarageBand, for example.
But you can't process it, and you need to make a render of it for you to perform onto and whatnot. What you can do is you can create a new session, render the previous session, bring that file into that session, record your vocal in that session, and then import that audio file or whatever your performance is back in the session that has all those plugins on it. It's extra steps. And luckily, with ability of computers just increasing pretty much exponentially, latency is getting less and less of an issue.
It is.
But if you are overrunning, like let's say you're a plugin whore, like sometimes I am.
Man, me too. We all fall victim to it.
Yep. Especially if you have like a specific thing you want to do, or you're just throwing a bunch of shit at the wall to see what sticks. And then you start recording on it, and it just ain't happy with it. If that's you, that can be a way to kind of get around those problems.
Totally agree. I want to make 2 quick points. First of all, we're in an age of computers where we are so spoiled to have what we have, and you wouldn't even believe how fast these computers are. And most of the time, you won't even notice because they're so fast, right? That's the whole point, is that for you not to notice. So when you're doing these things, like Sean mentioned earlier, you have instruments on your tracking session, right? Your production session. Those instruments have to read those samples from a hard drive, right? Whether it's the hard drive on the computer or it's the hard drive that's externally plugged into your computer, it has to read the samples because it's not stored within the plugin itself. So that takes time. And if you're on the same hard drive, well, then all of a sudden you're reading and writing to the same drive. That also takes time, right? So now you get into these little areas, these little pockets of when you start to understand how these plugins function and the processing happens, then you can start to relate, oh, this is taking a while because it has to do this to get me the sound out of here, right? It all takes time and it all adds up. So what Sean was saying with freezing and bouncing in place and committing tracks is a wonderful way to avoid this issue and still be very productive. I forgot the second one. I had 2 things, and I forgot the second. Oh, I remember it now. I got it now.
Sean, there's a little bit of latency in the brain there.
Exactly. See, there you go. There you go. I need some more coffee, decrease my buffer rate. So
that is what coffee does.
Right? Mind blown. And then to Sean's point again, that computers are exponentially increasing, right? If you're still having trouble with latency, that takes us now maybe into a different range, maybe outside the computer. And that's when things start to kind of get a little bit trickier because the steps to fix it aren't always as simple as clicking something within a menu, right? Or reformatting a drive to work for this specific reason, right? Now we start getting into longer chains along the way. I know for me, for example, I was having a lot of latency a few years ago with one of my interfaces. And it was so much so that people would actually be like, hey, I'm hearing myself. Can you just not? I'm like, I don't have any way to control the monitoring, right? Like it's all within Pro Tools. And I was like, I need to fix this because this is a really big issue. And honestly, if you have latency at a studio, you're automatically looked at as not professional, right? I mean, if you have that, that's like day one that you have to solve, right? And so I was like, okay. So I went out, got a new interface, paid a pretty penny for it, and latency was gone. That's great, right? But it was definitely my interface, no doubt. And I think one of the reasons why it was my interface is because I had a converter that would go into Thunderbolt 2 and then spit out to Thunderbolt 3.
Yeah.
So now you have adapters that you're buying. You have USB hubs that you're buying. Each one of these creates a bottleneck because it's not the most efficient way into the computer. This starts to become a really big pain in the ass because now you deal with abandonware and then you deal with just things updating as life goes on. And now it starts costing you money. So just want to say that going outside of the computer to fix latency starts becoming a bigger issue than within the computer itself, unless it is the computer itself. Then you're going outside the computer and buying a new computer, right? So that's just what it is. And
which is something that I am very glad that there are more and more interfaces on the market that are coming up that have a direct monitoring toggle on it. Where you just flick the switch and now you are directly hearing from the interface from the preamps what the recording is instead of going into the computer process, getting converted back out of the computer and then into the headphones.
Exactly.
And that can be very helpful as well.
Absolutely. So now Sean makes a great point, is now direct monitoring, right? So what that is basically, like Sean says, it bypasses the Pro Tools session, right? And then you hear it directly from the interface itself, okay? So, of course, I think UA does it one of the best. They've been so good at it for so long. Although people have had issues with it lately with updates. So you got to be careful because it's software, right? So you always have to be very careful. But UA does a great job of it. Many other companies do also a great job. Focusrite, whatever, you name it. People have this figured out by now.
Which is why, honestly, software is just the issue. You should just get a 16-track tape reel-to-reel and a 16-track analog board. And do all your recordings from there.
That's right.
Yep.
Fuck
software and A to D converters.
That's right.
Record. Just do that.
Bon appetit.
Boom. All right, we're done. But no, that's a good point. Like you are going to get updates. You're going to get things that could potentially cause problems where there once were none. So even if it's like, you got your interface, you've been working on it, making demos, working on your songs, recording yourself at home or in your project studio for your music, and you've never had a problem, one day it might just start. And you got to know where to look or some quick fixes in order to solve it, so that way at least you can get through it until you have to update to different hardware or software or whatever it may be. And those are the main places to look and the main workaround.
And you can actually test this too, right? You can do latency tests within the DAW, right? Where you record a hit and then you see exactly where it's printed in terms of samples, right? And if it's so many samples away, you can calculate that to milliseconds or whatever. And you know exactly how much latency that you're getting within the DAW. It's a pain in the ass to do, but it's a good way to do it. That's what I did with my interface, and I was getting some latency. I was like, all right, let's knock this out. I want some direct monitoring. I want good direct monitoring, and I just want to make sure that this is very smooth for people that need that instantaneous reaction. Of course, one of the easiest fixes around this is just muting yourself while you record. I work with a bunch of people that actually love not hearing themselves and just loving the beat or just being played.
Or one headphone on, one headphone off.
Exactly. So very easy fixes. Not long term, though. No. Not long term, because you're going to run into somebody that doesn't want to do that, right? And honestly, 9 times out of 10, people don't like doing that. But I feel like I have a few people that do love doing that. So it's like, all right, like we'll try it. And it always messes with me. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. I gotta mute his vocal. Like, whoops, sorry about that. And you always feel like shit too. They're like, oh, I could hear myself. I'm like, oh, I knew this. Damn it. Like back to square one.
Oh well.
Yeah. So I got to fix me. I'm the issue.
Where are the problems here?
See?
Honestly,
there you go. That's what it all results back to.
Yeah.
No.
Our buffer rates are too high. We're plugging whores. It's nothing's going to work out. Nope.
Nothing. Nothing. Too much gear.
Too much gear.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's kind of, I think, all I had to say about latency.
Yeah. I would say that's pretty much the gist of that for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a big pain in the ass sometimes. And once you once you start going outside the computer, things start getting a little expensive.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to make a change. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just need a new adapter. Maybe you just need to go right to the computer. I don't know. Maybe you just got to experiment with different setups and do the best that you can.
Yeah.
You will never eliminate latency 100%, by the way.
This is
true.
This is true.
Stop playing the zero-sum game because you're never going to get rid of it 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So just saying.
Yeah. So that being said, thank you for dining in with us as we talk about latency today. Let us know any latency horror stories or your experiences with latency that you have in your home setup or when you've been to studios or whatnot. We'd love to hear kind of what your exposure to this kind of concept has been. And also let us know if you want us to cover more kind of just simple tasks, like more like this is what an individual topic is instead of more artist development, broader kind of things. Just more like, hey, these are things that you need to be aware of as you do more of your own production, more recording and that kind of aspect of it. But yeah, if you don't want to do necessarily a home recording or all of your own stuff and you are in the area and you'd like to work with an amazing engineer to do some recording done, you can hit up Brandon.
Oh, thanks, Sean. That's so nice of you. I appreciate it. I always got to thank you before.
Yes, you do.
I get into it. So. You can find some more info about what I do at studio222recording.com. I have to update my portfolio again. I keep telling myself this in the
We've
episode.
mentioned this in the past 3 episodes.
And I feel like I'm going to take accountability eventually. But
leave a comment saying, Brandon, update your portfolio.
Please, because it needs to happen. You need to hold me accountable because I'm not going to do it. So you can find all about what I do there and my portfolio and everything. I still need to update it, of course. And then you can leave me a message there and I will email you back as soon as possible. And if you do just any kind of music, any kind of audio, I'd be willing to hear from you. Yeah. So just reach out. You can find me there. And then you can also find another really cool website on the internet that Sean has.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, if you want to.
And he's a great engineer too.
No, I was pausing because the buffer latency.
Oh, I like it.
I was calling back to the latency issue. No, you're good, dude.
I didn't see. I buffered a little bit.
Yep. Man. Callback failure. Yes, Brandon, I appreciate you. Thank you. You can always contact me at swsrecordings.com. I do remote mixing and mastering for folk, rock, acoustic, and blues. So if you have a project you've recorded at home and you just want to get that professional polish to get it ready to sound as best as it can and competitive with all the other songs out there, hit me up there. On top of that, I do a one-on-one artist development coaching, which is basically this podcast, but more specified towards you and your career to help take that to the next level and help you grow faster on your music industry journey to make an income doing what we love, which is music.
Hell yeah.
So on top of that, if you want to talk to both of us, you can hit us up at Music Makers Cookbook stuff. We've got social media accounts on a lot of the platforms: Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. Don't have a Twitter. Well, Twitter doesn't exist technically, but we don't have an X. So you can't find us there. But you can leave a comment on any of these videos or any of these episodes. Spotify now has a comment section part of it, so you can leave a comment if you're listening to us on that. On other audio platforms, we are on there as well. But you can also contact us at podcast@musicmakerscookbook.com if you want to hit us up directly. Let us know what kind of topic you'd like us to cover in future episodes. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So thank you for dining in with us. Thank you for getting this far in the episode. And with that all being said, from our kitchen to yours.
Bon appetit.
Hey, he got it.